Back in the days of the early Roman Empire, when the troops of Cato were crossing the African deserts during their campaign against Julius Caesar, they faced a particularly unsettling creature. It was a snake with two heads, one in the front and the other attached to the tail. Depending on which direction the animal wanted to move, one head would work as the main head and the other would follow as a tail. It was a creature able to go in both directions, an Amphisbaena in ancient Greek. It was a very venomous animal, so much as if 1 month was not enough to pour out all the poison, in words of Plinius the Elder. This creature persisted in the medieval bestiaries until its existence was refuted, as many other ancient ideas, during the scientific revolution in the 17th century. The basic rules of nature and anatomy completely forbade the existence of such animal, and thus, alongside with krakens, mermaids and unicorns, the Amphisbaena was completely banished to the realm of mythical creatures. We wouldn't consider its real existence ever again. Unless... Greetings, my friend, and welcome to It's Not a Monster, on the defense of the misunderstood, the despised, the vilified, or just the ugly ones. I am David Andres Kinch. The first time that I heard this story was in a tale from the book of Imaginary Beings by Margarita Guerrero and my favorite writer, Jorge Luis Borges. If you like fantasy and also this podcast, you should check out that book. But that was not the first time that I heard about this animal. That was years before in college studying biology, because, yes, the Amphisbaena is a real creature. But it's not the venomous and lethal two-headed snake described by Romans and ancient Greeks, and today I want to talk to you about that. This time, I'm not going to reframe a well-known creature with a problematic fame. The Amphisbaena is rarely known, but the times that is recognized is usually blamed with the same sins as the snakes. So, to prevent this, I want to introduce, in a proper manner, a marvelous inhabitant of this world that you might not be so familiar with. Today, we're going to talk about the Amphisbaena, or the worm lizard. First things first, the Amphisbaenas, or worm lizard, are not snakes, neither worms, even though they look a little bit like one. They conform the suborder Amphisbaenia, a group that is divided between 6 families, which in total include more than 200 species, most of them living in South America and Africa, and some other species in the Caribbean, Florida, the Mid-East, and part of the Mediterranean region. All of them are limbless lizards, except for 3 species in the genus bipes, which have a couple of specialized tiny forelimbs that looks a lot like the small claws of a mole. And yes, Amphisbaena is part of the Squamata, the same order that other lizards and snakes belongs to. But they are not snakes, they are more like their distant cousins. Actually, you would be surprised by the number of legless lizards that exist which are not snakes. How do we know this? Well, there are a couple of key traits that set Amphisbaenians apart. 3 of the most evident are: first, their lung reduction. Because of their elongated body, they have undergone a drastic reduction of their right lung, while in snakes and other limbless lizards, this has happened with the left lung. Second, their body scales. They have a ring-like arrangement, one ring of scales after the other through all their bodies, making them look more like a worm. instead of the typical diagonal overlapping scales in snakes. And third, their brain case. Their skull is very solid and robust, something completely different to the super articulated and flexible skull of snakes. All these traits have something in common. They are strongly related with the lifestyle of the Amphisbaena. There is no other lizard so specialized as a burrowing creature. Their elongated body allows them to move easily underground. Their tall skull makes their heads a very efficient drilling tool. And the ring disposition of the scales facilitate moving backwards in their tunnels if necessary without too much resistance. This is actually the only burrowing reptile able to do that. Okay, a burrowing lizard, with strong longitudinal muscles yet no limbs, no striking coloration, and with eyes so reduced that their face look like a cartoon. How is this related with the mythical creature that I mentioned at the beginning? Is this a dangerous creature? Do they bite? Well, actually, even though they are not venomous as the ancients say, if they are handled without taking necessary precautions, they can bite, quite powerful for their small size. This is true at least for Amphisbaena alba, one of the most common and better known species. However, considering the subterranean habits of these creatures, an encounter of this type is very uncommon. In a survey done in a Brazilian hospital between 1984 and 1990, from 473 cases of reported snake-like bites, only one was caused by an Amphisbaena species, Amphisbaena mertensi. And I mean, considering their habits and lifestyle, they do not represent a great threat to us. They mostly feed on all kinds of small invertebrates, and even in the case of the biggest species, the aforementioned Amphisbaena alba, which can reach up to 80 centimeters, they don't feed on anything much bigger neither, no bigger than some small vertebrate that they prey on in an opportunistic way. And talking about the diet, there is actually something interesting here. In some regions of South America, the Amphisbaena are also known by the name of Mother of Ants. Both the locals and some field reports suggested a strong association between these lizards and leaf-cutter ants, with cases of these lizards even laying their eggs inside these ants' nests. Some scientists first believed that the Amphisbaena frequented these nests because they feed on the ants. But if that were so, the ants would have a more hostile reception to the Amphisbaena, which is not the case. There is another explanation. When they visit the ants' nests, most of the time the Amphisbaena are found in the lower chamber, not the ones that host the fungi crops or the ants' larvae, which would be an obvious target, but the refuse chambers. There, it seems that they feed on beetle larvae, which are common dwellers in the ants' nest. When they are done with the beetles, they might go back to their own tunnels, or they can go up to the surface and try to find another ant nest. Now you might ask, how the heck a semi-blind legless lizard could find an ant nest? Well, in the same way that ants themselves do it. The Amphisbaenas are able to smell ants' pheromones, so they can find and follow the same tracks that the ants use for their orientation. Depending on how do we see it, we can perceive this Amphisbaenid ant interaction as an opportunistic and inoffensive visit from the first ones, or even as a symbiotic cooperation between both, where the Amphisbaena feeds and gets rid of potential parasites. Now that we know that the Amphisbaena is not venomous and mostly eat bugs, what about the two heads thing? Was it just an ancient superstition? Well, it kind of has an explanation. As many other lizards, the Amphisbaena present a behavior known as urotomy. When a predator is attacking, they are able to detach their tails, sacrificing a part of their body as a distraction for the predator in order to be able to escape. But predators could be very smart. Those that specialize in this kind of snake-like creatures know that frequently the best strategy is go directly for the head of the victim. Therefore, if you as a prey manage to confuse your attackers about which part of your body is your head and which one is your tail, and if on top of that you are also able to detach your tail as a decoy in case that the predator catches you, you have a very solid escape strategy. The tail of the Amphisbaena is not slim at the tip like the snakes. It has a blunt end, so it looks some way similar to their heads. Some species, like our friend Amphisbaena alba, take advantage of this, and when they feel threatened, they do something called horseshoe display, which consists in raising both the head and the tail in a menacing way, making it difficult to distinguish one extreme of the animal from the other. There are other species, like the small Leptosternon microcephalum, who takes this one step further. They can slither backwards as easily as they go forwards. This is very useful when they need to go backwards burrowing their tunnels. But they also use it as an escape strategy, escaping quickly in one direction to suddenly going backwards without any way to know quickly what is the real head of the animal. Now you might imagine why the ancients got so confused when they saw these creatures moving. There's a final thought that I want to share with you about the Amphisbaena. The ironic fact that being such a good fossorial creature allowed them to, in the past, conquest new lands by sailing. As I mentioned before, this group is distributed between the Americas, Europe, and Africa, lands very far from each other. This was initially explained by continental drift. It was thought that the Amphisbaena ancestor appeared when all these lands were the same continent, the Great Pangaea. And after the continents started to split more and more, these different Amphisbaena groups got isolated and started to diversify. But some genetic studies have suggested that this diversification process started a little bit later, after the continents had already drifted apart. There should have been a way in which this creature crossed the sea when there was already some distance between the continents, and that way is rafting. This is the name of a process in which a chunk of soil and vegetation breaks away from the mainland, mostly because of erosion, and is driven away by the currents and winds to other islands or even continents, carrying within unexpected passengers. Imagine a huge tree that, because of the ground wear or a big storm, falls off from a cliff into the sea or a big river, dragging with it a big chunk of dirt and vegetation between its thick roots. Between these roots, some animals have been dragged too, maybe some insects, maybe our Amphisbaena. And since our friend is a reptile with a very quiet lifestyle, they could spend weeks or even months without extra water or food until reach land again. According with some researchers, I quote, "The odds of any particular tree or raft resulting in a successful dispersal might be millions to one. But with millions of trees washed out to sea over millions of years, the odds could be relatively high." End quote. And this is the Amphisbaena, a small but tough creature. Simple and basic in this shape, yet able to move in ways that no other animal could. Quiet with the friends, but a strong biter with the foes. An expert miner. and an accidental sailor. There are still a lot of things that we don't know about the Amphisbaena. Most of the stuff that we have learned is about those species that are easier to spot, the bigger ones and those who spend more time on the surface, and considering how special already are those ones, who knows which amazing adaptations and behaviors hide the species more elusive. Those that rarely abandon the warm protection of their deep subterranean abodes. This podcast is part of a small study about non-charismatic species. If you have 2 minutes and you would like to contribute to science and conservation, please check the link to a survey in the description of this episode. It's very quick, I promise. You can find reference and extra material at the description. This episode was produced by me, David Quinche Giraldo. Thanks for listening and see you next time.